The fear. The cell was cold and silent. The walls were made of metal, rough and gray. The air smelled of rust and smoke. She sat in the corner, her knees pulled close to her chest, her eyes wide and full of terror. Her people had always told her stories about the humans. They were killers, destroyers, beasts in the skin of men. She had grown up hearing whispers that if humans found you, they would tear you apart. Now she was living that nightmare, trapped inside their fortress. Every sound outside the cell made her heart jump. Boots striking against the floor, steel doors creaking, voices echoing in the hallway. Her mind filled with horror every time she thought one of them would come inside. She was not a warrior, not a soldier, just a young woman who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her people had fallen in the battle, and she was taken, alive but not free. The silence stretched, heavy and painful. Her eyes moved to the shadow on the wall, the iron bars, the dim red light above her head. Her hands shook, not from cold, but from fear. She remembered the old words of her mother, warning her never to trust a human, never to believe in their kindness. They were monsters, monsters wearing human skin. The door opened, and her heart stopped. A tall figure stepped inside, the sound of his boots echoing in the small space. He wore armor, scratched and battered, his face hidden under the shadow of his helmet. For a long moment, he did not move. He only stood there, watching her. Her breath came quick and shallow, her chest tight. Her mind screamed at her, "This is the end. This is the monster that will finish you." The soldier took a step forward, and the ground seemed to shake beneath her. She pressed her back harder against the wall, wishing she could sink into it and disappear. Her voice caught in her throat. No scream would come out. She closed her eyes, waiting for the pain, but instead there was silence. Slowly, carefully, he lowered something onto the floor, a small bottle, water glistening inside. Next to it, a packet of food sealed. Then he stepped back, as if he was giving her space. Her eyes opened, confusion replacing terror for just a moment. Why would he do this? Was this a trick? Her people always said humans played with their prey before killing it. She stared at the bottle, her dry throat aching, but her fear was stronger than her hunger. She did not move. The human soldier remained still. No words, no threats, just silence. Finally, he turned and walked back toward the door. His heavy boots echoed once more. He stopped at the frame, his head turning slightly. For a heartbeat, she thought he might speak, but he left without a word, the door closing behind him. She sat frozen, her body trembling. Her mind spun in circles. Why would a monster leave food and water? Why did he not harm her when he had the chance? The stories never spoke of this. The stories only spoke of death and cruelty. Hours passed, though time inside the cell felt endless. Her hunger clawed at her stomach. Her lips cracked from thirst. The bottle of water shone faintly in the red light, calling to her. She shook her head again and again, whispering to herself that it was poison. It had to be poison. But still, her eyes never left it. At last, her shaking hands reached forward, slowly dragging the bottle toward her chest. She sniffed it. She hesitated, then took one desperate sip. It was clean, pure water. The fear inside her did not vanish, but something else slipped quietly into her heart. Doubt. Doubt about the stories, doubt about the humans. Yet she crushed it quickly, telling herself she must not be fooled. Monsters wore masks, and this was only a mask. Still, as she closed her eyes and let the water touch her tongue, she could not stop the thought that maybe, just maybe, the monster who had entered her cell was not a monster at all. The encounter. The next day came slowly, each hour inside the cell stretching longer than the last. She had not slept much, every sound in the dark waking her up, every shadow making her heart race. But the water she had drunk gave her strength, enough to keep her alive, enough to keep her waiting. She told herself again and again that it was a trick, that the human only wanted her to lower her guard. Still, she could not erase the memory of the moment he left without hurting her. No monster she had ever heard of in the old stories behaved that way. The door creaked open again, and she froze. Her breath caught in her throat as the armored figure entered, the same human soldier as before. His armor looked heavy, scratched from battles, the helmet covering his face. He carried something in his hand, a small box that clicked as he placed it gently on the floor. She pulled her knees tighter, her eyes locked on him, fear and suspicion burning in her chest. The human crouched down, not close enough to touch her, but close enough for her to see his movements clearly. He opened the box, and inside was a set of medical supplies. Bandages, ointments, and a small injector that gleamed under the dim red light. He did not speak. He only pointed to her arm, where a deep cut bled slowly beneath the torn fabric of her sleeve. Her first reaction was anger, suspicion. Why would he care if she bled? Why would a monster want to heal its prey? She shook her head violently, pressing herself against the wall, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Stay away." Her words were soft, but the human tilted his head as if he understood the meaning. He did not move closer. He only set the supplies on the ground and pushed them slightly toward her. Then, slowly, he raised both hands in the air, showing her they were empty. It was a gesture of peace, something she had never expected from him. The silence stretched, heavy and strange. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her heart pounding against her ribs. Her people had taught her that humans never showed mercy, that they thrived on fear. But this one, this silent soldier, seemed to be breaking every rule she had been taught. Finally, unable to bear the sight of her bleeding arm any longer, she reached forward with shaking fingers. She grabbed the bandage and wrapped it clumsily, her eyes never leaving him. The soldier stayed still, watching quietly, his hands still raised. When she finished, she looked at him, her lips parting as if to ask why. But no words came out. The human lowered his hands and slowly reached for the food pack he had brought. He placed it near the bottle of water she had left half empty, then stood again. For the first time, he removed his helmet. Her breath caught in her chest. She expected to see fangs, glowing eyes, or some twisted face like the stories described. But instead, it was only a man, his face worn with scars, his eyes tired but not cruel. He looked older than she had imagined, yet there was no hunger or hatred in his gaze. Only calm, steady patience. She stared, unable to speak, her mind breaking apart everything she thought she knew. Humans were supposed to be monsters, but his face was just a face. His eyes were just eyes, filled with something she could not explain. Compassion, maybe or sorrow. For a moment, their eyes locked, and the world outside the cell seemed to disappear. No battle, no war, no chains, only two beings staring at each other, trying to understand. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, rough but gentle. "You are safe," he said, slowly, carefully, as if the words were heavy. Her people's language was not his, but she understood enough. The meaning reached her heart, and it shook her more than any weapon ever could. She turned her face away quickly, tears burning at the edge of her eyes. She did not want to believe him. She could not. But a part of her, small and fragile, wanted to believe it was true. The human soldier stepped back, sliding the helmet under his arm. He gave her one last look before leaving the cell once again. The door shut behind him, leaving her alone with the silence. Her heart was still trembling, but her fear was no longer pure fear. It was mixed with confusion, curiosity, and something she dared not name. As she stared at the food, the water, and the bandages, she whispered to herself, "Maybe not a monster." The test of trust. The days that followed blurred together. The cell was still cold, the walls still gray, yet something inside her had changed. Every time the door opened, her heart still raced, but it no longer raced only with fear. It raced with questions, with confusion, with the memory of the man who had shown her mercy. The human soldier came again and again. Each time he brought something small: food, water, bandages, a blanket when the nights grew colder. He spoke little, sometimes only a single word, sometimes nothing at all. But his silence was never cruel. It was patient, steady, almost protective. She watched him closely, trying to find the hidden trap. She told herself there must be one. There had to be one. Monsters did not give without reason. Monsters always demanded something in return. Yet the trap never came. When she refused the food, he left it anyway. When she turned her face away, he did not force her. When she trembled at his approach, he stepped back and gave her space. It was as if he understood her fear and respected it, and that broke her more than any weapon could. One night, after he had gone, she sat staring at the blanket he had left. It was coarse, patched, smelling faintly of smoke and iron, but it was warm. She wrapped it around herself and whispered into the silence. Why? The word echoed against the walls, unanswered. She pressed her forehead against her knees and fought back tears. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to cling to the stories of her people. But each act of kindness chipped away at the hatred, leaving only doubt. The next day, when the door opened again, she surprised herself by not hiding in the corner. Instead, she stayed sitting, her eyes fixed on him. The soldier paused at the doorway, as if sensing the change. He stepped inside slowly, placing another meal on the ground. Then he looked at her arm, where her wound had healed under the bandages. For the first time, she spoke directly to him, her voice soft but steady. "You why?" Her words were broken, her language rough to his ears, but he understood enough. The soldier removed his helmet, his tired eyes meeting hers. He did not answer with long sentences. He only said one word: peace. The sound of it struck her harder than any weapon. Her people had never said humans wanted peace. They said humans wanted power, blood, and conquest. But his eyes did not lie. His voice did not tremble. He believed the word he spoke, and that belief reached her. She turned away quickly, not ready to let him see the storm inside her. That night, she did not sleep. She thought about him, about the way he left food without asking for anything, about the way he raised his hands to show he meant no harm, about the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. She thought about the word peace, and it echoed again and again. She did not want to believe it, but she could not erase it. The next time he came, she tested him. When he placed the food down, she pushed it back toward him, shaking her head. If he was truly a monster, if it was truly a trick, this was the moment he would show it. But he only looked at her for a long moment, then quietly slid the food back toward her. No anger, no force, only patience. When she still refused, he left it there and walked away. The door closed behind him, and she stared at the meal with tears in her eyes. He had passed the test. Her heart wrestled with itself. The old fear clung tightly, whispering that she could never trust him. But the truth was harder to ignore with each passing day. The monster her people described was not standing in front of her. The man who entered her cell was something else entirely, something she did not yet understand. And for the first time, she wanted to know who he was and why he risked kindness in a place where kindness could kill. The dangerous rescue. The fortress was never silent. Even deep inside the prison cells, she could hear the endless rhythm of war outside. Engines roaring, weapons firing, voices shouting commands in a language she barely understood. She had grown used to the sound, but one night the noise changed. There was shouting closer than before, angry and sharp. Boots thundered down the corridor, and her heart froze. The door burst open, not with the slow creak of the human soldier, but with violence. Two different soldiers stormed inside, their armor darker, their faces hidden. One pointed at her with disgust, spitting words she could not understand. The other raised his weapon, the glowing tip humming. Her blood ran cold. This was not mercy. This was not patience. This was death. But before the weapon struck, another figure appeared. It was him, the soldier she had come to fear and question, the one who had shown her kindness. He stepped between her and the weapon, his own rifle raised, his voice like thunder. The other men froze for a moment, surprised by his defiance. Then the shouting began again, harsh and heated. She could not understand the words, but she understood the meaning. He was protecting her. The clash came fast. The dark soldiers reached for their weapons, but he moved quicker. The sound of shots echoed through the cell, metal sparking, bodies falling. The smell of smoke and heat filled the air, and she covered her ears, trembling. When it was over, silence returned, broken only by her ragged breathing. He turned to her, his armor scratched, his eyes burning with urgency. "Come," he said, the word sharp but clear. She hesitated, frozen between fear and trust. But his hand was already reaching out, not to grab, but to offer. It was her choice. Her body shook as she took it, her small hand trembling in his armored grip. He pulled her to her feet, guiding her out of the cell. The hallway beyond was chaos, alarms blaring red, soldiers running in every direction. He moved fast, pulling her behind him, every step heavy with danger. Blaster fire lit up the halls. Shadows stretched across the walls. She had never felt so close to death, yet never so close to freedom. They ducked into a narrow passage, his body shielding hers as bolts of light tore through the air. He fired back, his aim deadly precise, never missing, never hesitating. She clung to him, her chest burning with fear. Every moment felt like the last, yet somehow he kept them alive. The fortress shook as explosions echoed above, dust raining from the ceiling. Still he pressed forward, never letting go of her hand. At one point they reached a locked door, thick and heavy. He placed her against the wall, signaling for her to stay low. Then he pulled out a device, sparks flying as he forced the lock open. The door slid aside with a groan, revealing a service tunnel beyond. He pushed her inside first, then followed, sealing the door behind them. The tunnel was dark, damp, the smell of oil and smoke choking the air. Her breaths came quick, but his voice cut through the panic, low and steady. "Safe," he whispered. The word was small, but it held her together when her strength nearly broke. They moved through the tunnel for what felt like forever. Every echo made her jump. Every sound made her fear pursuit. Yet with his hand gripping hers, she felt something she had never felt before. Not safety, but the possibility of it. And it was enough to keep her moving. At last, they reached a hatch that opened to the night sky. The fortress loomed behind them, lights flashing, alarms wailing. He pulled her out, the cold wind striking her face. For the first time since her capture, she saw the stars. Her eyes filled with tears, her chest tight with emotion. Freedom was close, yet danger was closer. Soldiers shouted behind them. The chase had begun. He turned, raising his rifle once more, his voice hard. "Run," he commanded. She stumbled forward, her legs weak, but her will stronger than ever. She did not know where to go. She did not know if they would live. But she knew one thing with certainty. The monster she had feared was no monster at all. He was the one risking everything to save her. The escape. The night air was sharp and cold, filling her lungs with freedom and fear at the same time. Behind them, the fortress roared with alarms, red lights flashing across the walls like angry eyes. Voices shouted, weapons fired. The enemy was already on their trail. Her legs trembled with every step, her body weak from days in the cell. But she forced herself to keep running. The human soldier stayed close, his hand never letting go of hers, pulling her forward whenever she stumbled. He did not speak, he did not slow. His eyes were locked on the dark horizon. They reached the edge of the compound, where broken walls and jagged ruins stretched into the distance. Beyond lay the wastelands, a place of shadows and danger, yet still safer than the fortress they had escaped. Blaster fire cut through the night, bolts of energy striking the stone around them. He turned quickly, firing back, each shot precise, each movement practiced. She watched in awe even as fear clawed at her chest. This was not just survival, this was protection. He was fighting for her, not for himself. Her breath came fast, every muscle burning, yet she did not let go of his hand. The wastelands swallowed them, tall black stones rising like the bones of giants. The path twisted, the ground uneven, every step threatening to trip her. But his grip held her steady, his pace guiding hers. For the first time in her life, she felt a strange kind of safety. Not the safety of walls or armies, but the safety of one man willing to stand between her and death. They ducked into a narrow canyon, the rocks towering high above. The shouts of soldiers echoed behind them, the chase relentless. The human slowed for a moment, scanning the shadows. Then he pulled her against the stone wall, motioning for silence. Her heart pounded so loud she thought the enemy would hear it. The sound of boots grew closer, closer, until she could almost see the glow of their weapons through the cracks in the rocks. Her body shook, fear threatening to break her. But when she looked at him, his eyes were calm, steady. He placed a finger to his lips, then slowly raised his rifle. The soldiers passed, their voices fading into the distance. He waited longer still, his patience unshaken, until the danger was gone. Only then did he move, guiding her deeper into the canyon. She whispered softly, barely daring to use her voice. "Why save me?" He did not answer at first, only glanced at her, his jaw tight. Finally, he spoke one word, low and firm. "Because." The word was simple, but it broke her heart more than any long answer could. Because meant there was a reason she might never understand. Because meant she was worth saving, even when she herself believed she was not. Hours passed as they moved through the wastelands, the stars above their only guide. He carried the weight of his rifle, his armor, and his wounds, but he never faltered. She noticed the limp in his step, the dark stain spreading across his side where a shot had grazed him. He hid the pain, but she could see it. For the first time, she felt something stir inside her that was not fear. It was something softer, something dangerous, a fragile thread of trust. When they finally stopped in the shelter of a cave, the night was quiet, the fortress far behind. He lowered himself against the wall, breathing heavy, his wound darker now. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she touched the blood. He tried to push her away, shaking his head, but she refused. "You help me," she whispered now. "I help you." The bandages he had once given her were still wrapped around her arm, and she carefully unwound them. She pressed the fabric against his side, doing her best to stop the bleeding. His eyes met hers, and for a moment the walls between them cracked. She saw the man behind the armor, tired, hurting, yet still fighting for her. He could have left her to die in the cell, yet here he was wounded and hunted because of her. Her throat tightened, her chest aching with something she had no name for. Silence filled the cave, broken only by the sound of his breathing. At last he whispered again, his voice soft. "Safe." The word had become his promise, his shield, his truth. And as she leaned back against the cold stone, her eyes never leaving him, she realized she no longer saw him as a monster. She saw him as a man who risked everything for her. The revelation. The cave was quiet, lit only by the pale glow of the stars slipping through cracks in the rock. She sat close to him, her hands still pressed against the wound at his side, her heart pounding with every shallow breath he took. The soldier had been her captor, her fear, and her savior all in the span of days. Now he was something more, a mystery she could no longer ignore. For a long time, neither spoke. The silence was heavy, but not cruel. It was the kind of silence where truths waited, pressing to be spoken. At last she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why me?" His eyes flicked toward her, tired but steady. He seemed to weigh the question before answering. When his words came, they were slow, as if each one carried the weight of his soul. Because not all humans are monsters. The words struck her harder than any weapon. Her people had always taught her that humans were evil, that they destroyed, conquered, and killed without mercy. But this man, this soldier bleeding in the dark beside her, was proof that the stories were not the whole truth. Her chest tightened, her throat burning as she struggled to find words. Then why fight? Why war? He closed his eyes for a moment, his jaw tightening. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, filled with something she did not expect. Not all humans want war, but some, they take power, they bring fear, and the rest are dragged into it. His gaze met hers again, and for the first time she saw not a soldier, but a man carrying a burden too heavy for one life. I fight because I must, but I saved you because I chose. She stared at him, her heart trembling. It was the first time she had heard choice in a human's voice, not command, not cruelty, but choice. It was more powerful than she wanted to admit. She looked away quickly, afraid that if she held his gaze too long her fear would melt away completely. Hours passed in the silence of the cave. He rested against the wall, his breath slowing as the bleeding eased. She kept watch at the mouth of the cave, her ears straining for any sound of pursuit. The wastelands were cruel, filled with predators and hunters, yet somehow she felt safer here than she had behind walls of stone and iron. And she knew why. It was because of him. At dawn the light touched the rocks in pale gold, and she turned back to him. His eyes were already open, watching her quietly. There was no demand in his gaze, only a strange patience, a steady strength. She felt her cheeks warm, and quickly spoke before silence swallowed her again. You saved me, but why risk your life? Your people will punish you, maybe kill you. His lips curved, not in a smile, but in something close, something sad. They already see me as broken, he said, his voice low. Lost too much, fought too long. Nothing left but orders, but I am tired of orders. He leaned his head back against the wall, his eyes tracing the cracks in the cave ceiling. I saved you because someone had to, because if I didn't, then I would be the monster they say I am. Her heart twisted. She had never thought of humans as anything but monsters. Yet here he was, carrying pain as deep as hers, burdened by battles that had stolen more from him than she could imagine. She saw the weight in his eyes, the sorrow in his voice, and something inside her cracked. He was not a monster. He was human, flawed and fragile, and yet stronger than anyone she had ever known. Her hand shook as she reached out, almost against her will. Her fingers brushed the edge of his armor, light and hesitant. He did not move. He did not push her away. Instead, he let her touch rest there, as if giving her permission to break the wall between them. For the first time, she whispered his name, a name she had overheard when the other soldiers shouted it in anger. It felt strange on her tongue, yet right. It was no longer the name of a monster, but the name of the man who had given her back her life. Silence followed again, but this time it was not heavy. It was soft, fragile, filled with a bond that neither could deny anymore. The fear in her heart had not vanished, but it had changed. It was no longer fear of him, but fear of losing him. And as the sun rose higher, painting the wastelands in gold, she knew the truth. The stories of monsters were lies, or maybe only half-truths. Because this human was not a monster. He was the one who showed her that even in war, there could be mercy. Even in darkness, there could be light. The choice. The wastelands stretched endless before them, sharp rocks rising like jagged teeth against the sky. For 2 days they moved through the shadows, hunted, exhausted, yet still alive. She stayed close to him, always watching his steps, always listening for danger. The wound at his side slowed him, but he never complained. Every time she offered to stop, he shook his head, his only answer a firm, "Not yet." By the third night, the air grew heavy with the sound of pursuit. The fortress had not given up. Their hunters were closing in. From the ridge above, lights pierced the darkness, beams sweeping across the stones. Her breath caught as she saw the soldiers gathering below, weapons ready, their shouts echoing. They were surrounded. The soldier stood at the cave mouth, his rifle heavy in his hands. He looked at her, his eyes calm despite the chaos. She shook her head, fear flooding her chest. "No, you cannot fight them all," she whispered, her voice breaking. But he only stepped closer, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Yes," he said, his voice low and steady. I can buy you time. Her heart shattered at the words. Buy her time meant sacrifice, meant leaving him behind. She grabbed his arm, her voice trembling. You saved me. I will not leave you. But his gaze was firm, stronger than her tears. Your people will listen to you. They must see humans are not only monsters. The weight of his words struck her. He was not only saving her life, he was giving her a mission, a truth to carry back. If she survived, she would be living proof that one human risked everything for peace. Tears blurred her vision, but she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I will remember. The hunters closed in, their voices louder, their weapons ready. The soldier turned, placing his helmet back on, his figure tall and unbroken. He raised his rifle, the glow of its barrel lighting the cave with fire. Then he looked at her one last time, and for the first time his lips curved into a true smile, small but real. Live, he said. She hesitated for only a heartbeat, then turned and ran, her legs carrying her into the shadows of the wasteland. Behind her the cave erupted with light and sound, the thunder of gunfire, the roar of explosions. The air burned with smoke, the ground shook with violence. She stumbled, tears streaming, her chest aching with every step. But she did not stop, because stopping would mean his sacrifice was wasted. The night swallowed her, the sounds of battle fading behind. When silence returned, it was not peace, it was emptiness. She collapsed to her knees, her face buried in her hands. He was gone, the man she once called a monster, the man who had given her hope. Her tears fell onto the dirt, soaking into the ground he had died to protect her on. But in her heart his words lived on. Not all humans are monsters. The truth burned brighter than the stars above, stronger than the lies she had been taught. She rose slowly, her body weak, but her spirit fierce. She would survive, not only for herself, but for him. She would tell her people what he had shown her, that there was more to humanity than fear and cruelty. That one man had risked everything, not for power, not for conquest, but for mercy. As the dawn broke over the wastelands, painting the sky in fire and gold, she whispered into the wind, Your sacrifice will not be forgotten. The breeze carried her words into the endless horizon, and though she walked alone, she no longer carried fear in her heart. She carried his courage, his truth, his choice. She had once believed humans were monsters, but one human sacrifice had rewritten her destiny. Forever.